Welcome everybody. I'm Rebecca Green, the editor-in-chief of Dear Producer. I haven't done a webinar since Sundance in January, so I'm happy to reconvene here, and I appreciate everybody showing up on a Friday afternoon in the summer for this great conversation. We're gonna go quickly. My webinars are usually an hour. We have 30 minutes today, so we're just gonna dive right in. If you have any questions, just put them in the Q&A box and I'll kind of keep an eye on them. And you can also talk with each other in the chat box if you'd like. I'm excited to have this esteemed group of writers and producers here today from The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, and want to give a quick thank you to our friends at Comedy Central for making this possible. This year, The Daily Show has received 2 DGA nominations, 2 PGA nominations, 3 NAACP award wins, a GLAAD Media Award nomination, and last year the show was nominated for 2 Emmys. So we should have a lot to learn from these folks today. So to get us started, Dear Producer is a lot about educating the industry on what it is producers do. And Seth Rogen tweeted recently something that I thought was interesting. And he said, "There's a lot of shit about the entertainment industry that makes no sense, but I'll never understand why in movies, the producer outranks the executive producer, and in TV, it's the other way around." And he went on to say, there is absolutely nothing that all EPs have in common. And so what I thought would be great to start with everyone today is just kind of going around the room. And all your bios are on the website if someone wants to go read your bios as well. But I would love if you could tell us, what your role is on the show, and then what does that mean on your particular show? Like, what is actually the function of your show? And so, Jen, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Sorry, I was muted because there was ambulances, and I've conveniently stopped. We live in New York. Sure, I couldn't agree more. I saw that tweet and I was dying because it is so true. Like, producer becomes this very generic catch-all title, right? But I just think it means like get shit done, hopefully. A good producer.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm the producer, showrunner, and writer now, and on our show, and that essentially I feel like I have my hand in every part of the show. Luckily, I work with a ton of competent people that really do every part of the show. I'm like there if there's like break glass in case of emergency, I will help. But mostly like each department kind of takes care of itself, and I check in with everybody and make sure that on a large scale, big picture, we are putting forward like the best show we can every day, the week, if we're looking forward towards the election season, like what does the show look like as a whole? And I'm constantly considering like how the guest segment that night affects the package we may play in Act 2 with our correspondent, may impact the headlines that we'll cover with Trevor in the first act. And yeah, just broad big picture. But then because we have to put on a show every day, we have so much content, we're online, we have podcasts, we have these activation spaces. I'm kind of, have a little hand in everything, which I like.
I just saw a new podcast announced yesterday.
We did, yeah, we just announced another one with Dulce and Josh Johnson, one of our writers. So cool.
Dan, do you want to take it from there?
Sure. So I'm the head writer / producer. So I lead the writing department, but I also, coordinate with other departments too, Max's department a lot. The expansion department, which is like social media or anything outside of what goes on the show, on the TV, basically. Field, there's a lot of coordination between all departments, but I guess most of my day-to-day is getting the show written, getting the writers organized and coordinated, making sure that everyone's assigned to whatever they need to be, getting their jokes, editing the script, and shaping it into that day's show.
How many writers would you say you had? Like offhand, how many writers? Is it like
we have
room every day?
Well, we have 12 staff writers, I believe, and then there's a couple senior writers. And then there's a few people like me who are a little bit above that station. Maybe they're writers slash producers, like Jen also is a writer. I'm a writer with a couple other people that are like above the staff writer position, but they are like have a writing credit and are involved in the writing in the show. So I think I don't know, Jen, like maybe 18 total if you add up like Trevor has a writing credit.
Yeah, I want to say like I get how ridiculous that we don't know, but it's like you forget like Trevor has a writing credit. We have
yeah, no, when I said it, I didn't actually expect an answer because it's such a like all the comedians themselves are writing. Like,
yeah.
Right.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, we make a lot of content, so
I was gonna say.
we're not getting the show 4 times a week. We're putting stuff out online.
Yeah.
We're doing stuff out in the real world. So we're making podcasts. So we're doing a lot of different things. So sort of need a big staff to handle all that.
Nice. Max?
Yeah, so I'm the supervising producer of the tag department, which is topical assignments group. And my main focus for that department is mainly the deep dives and the longer lead pieces. And a lot of the correspondent pre-tape pieces that's kind of like their POV, like whether it's CP time or Dulcin. So like Dan was saying, we do a lot of the research. We work a lot with Dan's department. We work a lot with Elise's department too. And as Jen was mentioning, because there's so much stuff, there's like very defined departments that we all coordinate and collaborate with one another. So like, while one show is making it on air, there's like 10 shows behind the scenes on a daily basis where like, we are planning things out weeks ahead for linear broadcast while expansion is planning things out in the real world. So like, we all on a daily basis cross paths with one another. And we're lucky because we like one another. Otherwise it would be less fun.
Elise?
Yes, I'm also a supervising producer. I manage the packages team, which is the team that is responsible for all the packaged segments that get rolled into the show. And so I oversee a team of segment directors and segment producers, and we execute both scripted and unscripted packages. So that's sort of like a traditional field piece with a correspondent and a director out in the field, interacting with all different kinds of both, sometimes harder hitting segments, political segments, and sometimes just really fun segments about like, anything that's just more part of today's social conversation. And then we also execute the scripted pieces that are like sketch pieces, or like Max was saying, how his team develops the segments, like the deeper dive correspondent driven segments like Dulcin, and CP time. We execute those in the actual shooting and producing of those on our end. So it's an opportunity for our very our varied group of correspondents to shine and bring some levity and a different point of view to the show beyond Trevor's voice.
Right. And, as you said, Max, the, show is typically, taping 4 episodes a week. I read it's 42 weeks a year. That's a lot of shows. You're producing during a time when the news cycle is moving so fast. I can watch the news at night and feel like I have my pulse on what's going on, but then the next morning I wake up and it's kind of all gone to hell again, and there's just something new that's more important than what there was last night. And so I'm not sure actually whose question this is for, maybe for Jen. I'm curious, producers, scheduling is such a big part of what we do. And so from a scheduling perspective, how are you planning out, you have the headlines, you have the correspondence. This week was the daily showography with Rudy Giuliani, which was amazing. How do you stay in the moment of the news, but also give your teams enough time to prep all of this amazing work?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the Trump years really prepared us well. I feel like the news cycle was even COVID and Trump. I feel like we're able to take a mini breath right now as compared to what it was the last like 4 years, right? So that has been amazing, actually. It's gone from, an insane news cycle to like just a very fast-paced news cycle, which of course is different than it was, 8 years ago. But yeah, now we just we try and plan things ahead in terms of like it's Pride Month. Let's think ahead for June. What are topics we want to cover that would really like shine and people would be wanting to hear during that month, and those things you think about ahead of time. And like, then there are things where you're like, oh, this will become topical at some point, right? So like with the Rudy film, Dan will laugh about this because every time those films take a very, very long time to produce. If you watch, like, as a producer, they are heavily produced.
It's a little mini documentary, that one was.
They're a little mini doc. So, so we can't crank them out like on a daily basis, obviously. So those are things that, like, a few of us sit around and we're like, who's gonna pop up in the news eventually, like, and would be really interesting to cover. And we think of those people and try and, we have like 6 of those in the works at all times.
Okay.
To roll out. Hopefully they're ready when something big hits. There was somebody else that we have found news pegs for each one of the biofilms that we've rolled on camera, just because you're picking people who, like, I think Putin, we waited till his like Mistress came out and we were like, oh, we have a Putin film ready, this is amazing. And so like with those pieces, and same thing with the stuff Elisa's team works on, like there are pieces that are constantly rolling forward that are topics that there are some that are really need to be tied to a date to air, and then there are ones that like we have female reproductive rights pieces in the works, and then you're like, okay, great, this conversation flared up again, let's make sure that's ready for Tuesday. So yeah, kind of just watching the calendar and also the news cycle and seeing what comes up. And then there's the stuff Dan is on every day. It's like every morning there's something to cover.
I mean, the good thing about our show right now is that the first act we just leave open for whatever is happening that day. And we might do 3 or 4 or 5 whatever stories mentioning in that first act that we've literally written from scratch the morning. Then the second act is a little bit more of an evergreen or semi-evergreen, where like maybe this will be a field piece or a sketch or something that we've been waiting for the right moment for. There's a good balance between things that like just happen, get that on the show, but we also have space for things we've been working on a little longer.
A lot of the stuff Max works on, these longer lead, heavier pieces like microaggressions in the workplace, always topical, but those are the things we would leave for like an act 2, like a real thought out thesis piece. And ideally there's a news peg, but oftentimes it's just something that we finally made room for on the show, that week.
Yeah, and with that, it's like, it's kind of also our job at the very beginning of creation, kind of thinking about shelf life of certain topics. Like we try to make sure that, especially a lot of the stuff that my department focuses on is a lot of institutional long running themes that kind of glom on to the news that pops up in singular form. Like this is always an undercurrent of what's going on. Like Jen talked about, if it's microaggressions in the workplace or institutional railroad, but we did a piece on just like the history of the highways and kind of the institutional racism connected to those and how they were very purposeful in their point to segregate communities. That's a topic that's always big, and we can prepare it and know that there'll be space on the show for it and something will happen. And then it feels like it was made just for that news peg, and it really hits the audience is somewhat aware of the topic. So when they get it, they're super engaged in it because they've heard a little bit about it and it's ready to go like it was just created that day.
I always say it's just like we planned it.
Yeah.
Elise, did you want to add?
Yeah, then sometimes like in my department, we have 7 segment directors that are sort of working on different projects all the time. And so they're working on longer lead, more researched field segments, but then we always have people that are available that can just shoot whenever we need to. So for example, a few weeks ago, we did a quick turnaround man on the street piece about gun control. And it was the kind of thing that it was about how the argument that the reason America has so many, the talking point, the reason America has so many mass shootings is because there's so many doors, because the shooters can get in all the doors. And so we just basically like picked up a camera and a correspondent and a director, and we ran out into Times Square and we shot with tourists who, mostly European and Southeast Asian tourists who could speak to this ridiculous premise. And so that was a great example of just being able to be mobile in that way allows us to both, work on longer lead, more thought out segments, but also react to what is currently the topic that everyone's talking about. And so while that's our version of the way our writers and our tag team can work on both longer lead and day of headlines, we have that mobility to be able to turn material around. And we turn it around now, even with COVID protocols slowing it down. We stay on top of that and we stay ahead of it with testing and everything. But there was definitely a learning curve when we were getting back into production. Yeah. In terms of we're used to being very reactive and very mobile, and that gave us another thing to
all the pre-employment testing.
Everyone, yeah. And distancing and everything. And so we've figured out the way to do it safest and that allowed us to still tell these stories the way we want to. And during COVID, everything changed the way we produce. And now all of our correspondents have their own setups at home so that they can send packages in, whether it's to the digital team or for an on-air segment. So it's allowed us, even though it's been very tricky to get up and running at the various stages, it allowed us to tell more stories and just get more content out all the time.
Yeah, I felt like just in watching that, it feels so much more robust that the show now back on air. There's just even the set, it just felt bigger and more and just very satisfying show.
Yeah, we're really very excited to be back in the studio with an audience. And listen, we tried to be very COVID safe. We stayed at home, I think, longer than any other late night show. And then we returned to a studio that was audience-less and tried to put on the best show we could with better equipment than we had at home, but not quite the feel of a big late night show. And now we try and react to protocols changing and all that stuff, but really it's so nice to be back in the space where you feel like we're making the show we're supposed to make. And like Lisa was saying, we're so mobile and reactive, and we have all of these, besides just Trevor, we have this amazing team of correspondents that are able to go out in the field and do different interviews from different points of view or report on stories, differently than Trevor, and or have conversations with Trevor where you can showcase 2 points of view. And that's something that is so unique to our show and isn't, it's one of the things that when we're producing the show, we're constantly thinking about, how can our show tell a story that won't be the same way that Stephen Colbert or Seth or John Oliver is going to tell that story. And that is, is that a package segment that we go out and do in the field? Is that a sketch? Is that Trevor having a conversation with Desi Lydic? Is it, so really it is New York City. But it's for a producer, I think it's really fun because we have so many tricks in our bag that you can pull out and use for different things. Our digital team that we call our expansion team, I know that's not across the board thing, but our social media videos that we put out, we're maybe this joke is just a joke that plays amazing on TikTok, right? Okay, let's do that. And really, we have so many avenues to put things out on. That part of the fun of producing it is figuring out where that joke or topic is going to play best.
When at least you answered it a little bit, but Max, when you're doing those, longer lead segments and pieces, is it all in-house staff? Are you hiring other directors? What does the makeup of your teams look like for those pieces?
Everything's in-house, and I have a team of researchers and segment producers that will work depending on what type of piece it is. If it's a headline for Trevor, I'll have my segment producers put together all the video and packaging on that. If it's a correspondent piece, just going back to Jen's point, for me and my department, we're a storytelling department, and it's like being a kid in the candy store because we can figure out a story and then be we have a person who could speak to it. who has a personal relationship to it. So maybe it doesn't need to be a Trevor piece. Maybe this is a really good Dulcin, like a really good avenue to kind of talk about something in a unique way that kind of breathes life into the subject. Because if we're giving you just a regular headline, it's a lot of dense stuff and it's really tricky history that we can really spend time in parsing it together. So, you know, if we do one of those pre-taped correspondent bits, that's where like Elise and I are in a lot of contact where, you know, Elise and I have worked together for 15 years at this point. It's really easy to know when my job ends and hers begins, and then it comes back together where it's us. There's never any question. And I think that's the biggest key to producing, is kind of knowing your lane. And it really starts at the top. I think Jen has really created a lot of clearly defined roles with a lot of good people that love working together. So it makes it not just easy, but fun when you can coordinate. Same thing when I work with Dan a lot. Like, Dan is busy on day of stuff all day, and we find our pockets of time to work together. We utilize those moments. So every time him and I meet again, we've already gotten closer and closer and closer to the finished product. So he's engaged when he needs to be engaged, but he's also not tied down to that when he's got other stuff to do. Because, like, you know, we've all said before, there's 10 to 15 shows going on at once, whether it's the show you're going to see next week, next month, an event you're going to see in your city, if it's something you're going to see on social media. Like, the show doesn't stop, no matter if that 21:30 ends, or more than 21:30 now. But
you're muted.
Wow, I was trying to save everyone. No, I was going to say, now we're like 35.
yeah, I shortchanged us. I
You
apologize.
did.
Well, yeah,
Put out a lot.
it's nice you have a team that you guys have worked together for so long. I mainly work in the independent film space, where like every project is a whole new, like the upstart of every movie and all new people, and it takes a minute to get by the time you really have your groove, you're done. And so it really shows, I think, in your work that you guys have that shorthand.
I think it helps to get it, but the amount of content that we have to get out there is very much helped by how long we've worked together, and being able to cultivate a lot of talent that can act on their own and then knows when to come back together. Yeah.
And the show is growing so rapidly. Like, even though Max and I have worked, I mean, I've worked with everyone on this call for a very long time. And there's still a lot of times that we're like, well, we're doing this new thing. So what makes the most sense? Should I, you know, we figure out which team does what, we break down, and it really is a conversation. I think it's very helpful that our team is deferential to one another, and we know, like, hey, this might be better if you guys handle this. We're not territorial about our work. We all want to make the best show that we can possible. So a lot of times our teams are also inclusive in terms of the voices that we have on staff. So sometimes it's like, hey, you know, I'm working on a project, but there's someone on Max's team who knows how to speak to this package. And so we utilize resources from each other, because our teams we all have people on our teams that have very, very diverse points of view and backgrounds and interests and passions. And it's just great sometimes to be able to rotate through and say, you know what, I think Chelsea actually would be able to speak really well to this HBCU package that we're working on. Can we borrow her for this? Mm-hmm. And just making sure that we are honoring the voice of the piece in the best way that we can by relying on the staff and the points of view that we have in our in-house.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me to my next question, probably for Dan. You know, like you said, you have all this diverse talent. I'm sure they all have their own opinions and points of view, and that shows. How do you then make this a cohesive show? I mean, obviously it's Trevor's show, it's his point of view. You know, what is the process? You know, I know he's writing as well, as everything flowing through him, and it's like, how do you make sure it still comes off cohesively every night with so many different personalities?
I mean, I think it is having Trevor really involved from the start on a lot of things, and making sure that, you know, he doesn't need to agree with everything that goes on, but it is his show and everything's coming under his show. So he is very involved, whether it's a deep dive on something or another piece or just a thing we're doing today. We make sure that we get his opinion, his take on it. Do you like this angle, that kind of thing? So there are a lot of different things going on, but having a host who's very involved in it definitely makes it more cohesive.
And he has such a clear point of view, and that once you've worked with him for a while, we can kind of run with things and know where he stands on them and get them to a certain point. but because he has such a clear point of view, which makes it, easy to have the show feel cohesive because it's all kind of through his lens. It's his face and name on the show, so it has to represent him. And also, there's so much content that there's so much work to be done that nobody's precious, right? That's like such a big part of making the show cohesive and making it the best show it can possibly be, is that we kill people's jokes all the time, we kill people's graphics all the time, we tweak, so I think that is a huge part of it, is just that, like, I mean, Dan and I were joking this morning about how I couldn't tell you my favorite segment because I don't even remember what we did this week. And that is both a blessing and a curse. It's like we put out so much that you become detached from most of it as individual pieces and just really attach the whole. And the whole is so much better when you're not attached to every little piece,
Yeah, it's like if your joke isn't in tonight, there's another show tomorrow night. Yeah.
Hey, go talk to Ramin about getting your joke on Twitter. Like we have every avenue to put out every joke if it's good. If it's not good.
Nice. So a little bit more of a personal question. I think, obviously you guys are producing a comedy show that is super funny, but the news itself, is hard, and you guys have to be in it every moment of every day and really knowing what's going on. And so I'd love to kind of hear from each of you of how do you balance, having your head in that space and also having fun. Elise, do you want to start?
Sure. The thing about what we do that's really such we're so lucky in this way, because so many times, there's a lot of really awful stuff going on in the world. There's stressful things that make us sad, things that make us angry, but we have this outlet every day. And whether it's our 4-night-a-week show, whether it's releasing stuff on social media over the weekend, like even when we are working all the time, there is this outlet because there's this humor and there is this catharsis in what we do. And I think a lot of times I don't know what I would do if I didn't have the outlet of where I could vent my frustration about the world. And I know that when we hear from our audience, they look to us for that outlet as well. And so that kind of connection is also something that helps keep us going, because we know that we are telling these stories and we are bringing humor to them and bringing some lightness, and it allows us to say, okay, we can do this, we can keep going. It definitely motivates us to come back in the next day.
Yeah. Max?
I mean, I'll try not to steal Elise's answer because it's everything
Good answer.
as well. But no, I think it's, there were conversations when we were all home at the beginning stages of the pandemic where like there was a lot of anger and a lot of sadness in the world. And we got to channel that through the people that are on staff that have to live it. And we had an outlet to do it. We had a piece that came out very, very early on the pandemic there was all these things going on with police shootings and protests, and my staff started talking about like, you guys don't understand, growing up, like we get a different talk than you guys get. And that was the essence of a conversation that started within a small group of people that had lived it. And then it's my job as a producer to help carry that story forward. And then we get it out into the audience. So half of our audience is like, I've never seen that done on TV before. Finally, somebody understands my voice. And the other half is, I never knew that. And so we can give them perspective, make their voices heard, and make them laugh. So no matter how bad the world is or how sad it is, or we're locked in our apartments for 2 years, like there's always joy. You can always find joy in any story, if it's merely just by telling the story, because like Lily said, there's always a cathartic release. And I think that's why we all work well together, because we all care about the issues we talk about. We all like having fun and we all like working together. And I think you see that every product we put out, that Trevor's voice is not an angry voice. And that really starts from top down. Like anger gets us nothing. Conversations gives us everything. And I think Trevor is the best person out there to kind of utilize that, to inject humor into conversation, to bring more people to the table, to have their ears open.
Dan?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how like it's just sort of inherent that the stories that last are all like depressing, like the war in Ukraine, like the long running story that we keep bringing, the pandemic, racism, like you don't get like a story like puppy enjoys ice cream, but it lasts for like 6. It's like when that happens, like and it's gone. The only ones that last are like bad things. So we keep going back because that's what is going on in the world, and so we have to cover it. But I think Max touched on it, and that there's always some way to find like a humorous angle in it. Sometimes it's not hitting it straight on. Sometimes it's what is the connection to this story and why is that ridiculous, or what's the coverage of this story. Sometimes it's like dark loose humor, but there's always something, and I do think it's cathartic to be able to express that from our point of view. And I've heard from people saying that it's cathartic and to be able to laugh at this stuff when they watch our show. It was really during the pandemic, and just having you guys on, like talking about it and making jokes, like that really helped keep my spirits up. So that it means a lot that helps people that way.
Jen?
Yeah, I think like I mean, everything that was previously said, I totally agree with. And I also think that we work with a bunch of people. I'm speaking for myself, but I think a lot of people that work there feel like this. It's like, I would be the person, I watch the news. I've always been engaged in politics. Like, so if I worked in just an accounting office or something, like I'd be the person by the water cooler being like, did you see about the war in Ukraine? Like, and probably wanting to talk about it all the time. And I work with 100 people that want to talk about it all the time. And that in itself is cathartic, just to be able to be with people that have different opinions and different backgrounds, but also same interests, similar interests, and want to talk about what's going on in the world. So we're lucky that our jobs provide us that. And I do think that, that's one of the big, and also we all like to laugh a lot and joke about things, to the point where I know when I go to family functions or functions with like my friends from home, I'm already making the darkest joke in the room and people are like horrified. And I'm like, oh, I forget that we do this all day, every day. And I have no social graces anymore because of people I work with. But it is like, it is so cathartic to be able to make jokes like that and have people around you all the time that we're just like, if you can't laugh, then you will cry. That is our job. So like, I've chosen to laugh at as much as possible while knowing that it's very serious, and ideally being able to make people laugh about it so they can handle their everyday in the world we're living in. And then also being able to like kick back when we can, like in our Act 4 Before a Moment Is End, we try and like call out organizations that are doing actual real work on the ground and not just comedy like we are, and try and steer our viewers to like, if you're sad about Ukraine, here's a great way to help. If you're worried about the LGBTQ community, like here's an organization that's doing amazing things. And so I think that for me has been very cathartic as well, like just being able to showcase people that are doing amazing work, and we are just driving our very engaged viewers to places that they are able to feel like they're actually helping with things. So
well, I have one last question. This has been a very fast, wonderful 30 minutes. A lot of the Dear Producer audience are, aspiring, emerging filmmakers in film school. So, the question for them, I'm asking on behalf of them is, what advice would you give a writer or producer who would love to get into late night? What do you do first? Where do you go? How do you get started? Max, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I can say where I started because it's kind of similar to other people on this. Like, I started as an intern. As an intern, and then Jen hired me as an intern on the show, and then I got hired as a production assistant. And I've had a number of jobs at the show, and I think the main thread through all of them is that there's never anything that I wouldn't be willing to do. And I think most of the people at the Daily Show, I would say maybe close to half started at an intern or entry level position. And it's been an ethos that, you know, Jen has been there through all the generations of the show, that it's kind of been pervaded through the whole staff, is that you're never above it. Like everybody on this call have to stop ourselves from doing something because there's other people to do them, because it's in our nature. I think it's in the nature of any good producer, is that it's really hard to define what a producer's job is, but there's nothing that it isn't. You know, like it really is, there's no limit to what it should be. And I think that's why it's so hard for people that aren't producers to understand, because while we have set roles in what we do on the show, like as you heard on this call, like there's nothing that not all of us combined to do together or wouldn't do for one another or hand off to another. And I think that's the most important thing. And I think that's why we've all become here and kind of grown at the show, is because that's kind of what the show culture is.
Yeah.
Well, and also just hats off to you, Jen. It's rare to work at a company where you know that there's upward movement, where you can actually grow and stay and cultivate. There's not many companies that I think value that in that same way.
Yeah, it is definitely, I always think of it as a major pro. If you started there and you learn, I mean, I did, you know, and you just learn every part of the show. There are so many people that started as interns and production assistants and just have moved up through the ranks, because if you work hard and smart, not just hard and smart, like then you will move up. And like we've seen at the show, like there's always upward mobility because we're constantly growing into different spaces, and every space we can put the show so that it's always like in front of viewers. And then the other thing I would say about people that want to become producers, directors, writers, there's so many avenues to do it now, but writing and just shooting your own, you can make a movie on an iPhone, go make it, you know what I mean? Which it does like kind of hurt that we all had to like intern and figure out how to like make things, but now people can just make them and put them online, and then you see them and you're like, oh my god, I want to hire this person, this thing is amazing, who made this? So there is like it's a little, you know, sad for those of us who started in the industry before iPhones existed, but really there are so many places and for writing, like send out funny tweets, you know, there are writers, I mean, Dan can speak to it, constantly on Twitter, and you start to notice the people who tweets get picked up. And for us, are they making jokes about current events? Wow, okay, this person is already writing for the Daily Show and they're not even here yet, you know. So we're looking, you know, we do have our eyes everywhere. So my suggestion to people, besides like try and get internships, learn as much as you can on the ground level of just like how a show is made and produced. And every show does it differently. So as many internships or production jobs as you can get, commercials, film, whatever. But also doing your own stuff all the time is a really great way to continue to hone your own voice, especially when you're in a lower level production situation. Like, you know, Elise and I write together on the side outside the Daily Show. And I think it's always good to like have your own projects, because like we said, like Trevor's show is Trevor's show, and I love making it and we're making it all the time, but it's always good to have your own outlet for your own creative things.
Dan?
Yeah, get your foot in the door any way you can. I would say if you have a dream job, obviously don't wait for that dream job to open up. Get your foot in the door, and then I'd add to Jen's, you know, sorry, I have a son if you can hear it. Add to Jen's like working hard and being good at your job. I'd also add like being someone people want to be around for like 10 or 11 a day, because you could be really good at your job and you could work really hard, but if you're unpleasant, you're hard to work with, you're uncooperative, or you have bad attitude, no one's going to want to hang. We are together all day, so no one's going to want to promote you and hire you and move you up and keep you in the company if you're not like a pleasant person to be around. So that is a big part of it.
That's very good advice. Elise, do you want to finish this up?
Sure. Well, I would say, you know, someone once said to me, it's a very obvious phrase, but you're only as good as your last job. And I know that when we hire people at the show, If they are not putting their heart and soul into the thing that we need them to do, we don't want them to do the next thing. And so in addition to like being really good at your job, like when we bring people on, we want to make sure that they're excited about whatever it is that they're doing. And that's just really important to us because like all of my colleagues have said, like, in order to move forward, in order to be a part of the team, you have to be a part of the team at the level that you're at. And the other thing that I want to stress that Jen mentioned is just really making sure that you're finding your own time to develop your own voice. Because if you're a PA and you're working on the show and you're doing a great job, that's terrific. But then also showcasing your talents and your voice to the people that are producing the show, making the show is so important. So like we have some PAs right now that sometimes pitch story ideas that then become unscripted pieces, and then they work on those and they work really hard doing the PA work on them.
Yeah.
And then they are the ones that end up, making their way into Max's team, or we've even had some interns that have gone on to be PAs and then are now writers at the show. But whatever position they were in at that time, they were working like dogs, but also focusing on their own point of view and their own voice. And we got to know them in both ways. And now they are like the fabric of our show.
Jen, is there anything I didn't cover that you wanted to say or add before we sign off?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think like I think like everybody here, like really proud of the show we put out every night. And I think that's the most important thing is that listen, not every night, I overstated. Once in a blue moon, we have a show that is like really tanked. And I think it's good when you can recognize that and not say that every show is good. Yeah. But yeah, I think in general, listen, we make like 160 episodes a year. So to be proud of most of that work and, the show's reputation as a whole we're really lucky. I think we worked with a really great host and a great staff and crew. And that's the most important part of producing a show, I think, is like cultivating the culture there and, having people motivated and morale as up as possible. And yeah.
Right. Well, I love the show. I watch it every night. It really helped me get through the rough days of the pandemic. So I appreciate all you guys put into your show. I have recorded this conversation. I'm going to put the replay up on Monday so more people can tune in since it is a Friday on a summer day. But thank you guys so much. And thank you for sticking around a few extra minutes so we can wrap up. And I appreciate your time.
No, thank you. Thanks so much for watching.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. All right. Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.